Now let's move into the next part, which is that immersive solstice pod. We want to get some sort of control for our end users over that wireless presentation so they can wirelessly present. And what we want from this immersive solstice pod is the IP address and the session key. So these two fields right here. We want those on a brand new layer that will only show up when they are currently on the display layer and when they've selected the immersive option to route to the displays, right? They only need the information when they need it. When they don't, let's get rid of it. So we need a new layer for that. And I will add that layer right with my displays one. And I'll call this 05 immersive. Now what I like to do when I'm combining two layers is make sure that the other layer that's going to be visible is visible when I'm building my second layer. That way I know what kind of real estate and space that I have to work with. So I'm going to leave my displays layer visible in this case, but I'm going to make sure I'm selecting my immersive layer and only working on that one when I'm adding my new controls. So I'll jump back and grab the IP and session key. And I'll select the immersive layer and copy and paste them there. The font is still a bit small, so I'll make sure that's a little bigger. I'm going to go ahead and grab these two graphics as well, so they kind of have an idea of what these are. And then because this is sort of a specific pop-up that they're going to see, I'm going to give them another group box that kind of sets this apart from everything else. All right. I like the way that looks so far. That's not too bad. And now I know that I want this to pop up whenever they select those immersive options for the two displays. So let's get that control set up. We're going to pull that, again, from where we're controlling our laptops. These are our source selections, right? So HDMI 3, that's the one for the wireless presentation device. So I'll expose the control pin for output 1, output 2, select HDMI 3. And in this case, I'm not sending anything into it, I'm actually sending something out of it. When they press that button, I want some action to occur. So from here, I will send to the emulator once again, immersive 1, 2, and then immersive out 2 to the emulator. Now we've got to work with that layer. We have to figure out how or why we're pulling that layer up. What action is occurring to make the immersive layer show? In this case, I'm going to use two different control functions. So I'll search for that again. I will first use a logic OR. If they select the first immersive option, or if they select the second one, I want this new layer to show. So that logic OR is now going to go to a logic AND. And we want to make sure that if they select the immersive layer and they're on that displays layer, only then will the new immersive option show. Because if we don't establish that they're still on the display layer, if we move away from that layer and go somewhere else, that immersive section will still show up on our other layers. So we don't want that. We want to make sure it's only when they're on that display layer. So I will send the display layer showing, show display. And now all I need to do is expose my new layer. There it is, immersive show, and I can send this to it. Layer immersive. That should be everything. Now it's time to test it and make sure it works. I'm going to check out the emulator first. I have the lights on, perfect. Now they need to connect their USB. We've already established that. That's working great. Now we have the Connect Laptop 1 HDMI. If I select that, the content on that left laptop, which is laptop 1, is being sent to the displays. Awesome. If we connect laptop 2, that is now being sent to the displays as well. Now we have a displays go to sleep button. We know that's working as well through the emulator. The last thing that we want to make sure is working is that last part, that immersive solstice pod, the information for them to wirelessly present. So I'll head over to my UCI. And remember, we only want it showing up when they're on this layer and they select that immersive option. So if I select it, there it is. It pops up right there on the right. I could select this one as well. Yeah, it works for either of them. Perfect. If I have it on, I want to make sure if I go to another layer, it's not showing up still. It's not, so everything works exactly as I want it to. We're all set.
One thing I want to talk about really briefly is, so control functions operate as sort of little miniature isolated if statements, right? It says that if my first condition is met and my second condition is met, then I will output a true. But if the first condition is met and the second condition is not met, or if either conditions are not met, then it outputs a false, right? We're validating various conditions and outputting whether or not those conditions have been met, true or false. That is really good for simple logic trees like this, where you just have a couple of things that you're validating whether or not they are true. But it gets more complicated if you have more things that you need to validate. Think about what just happened on our UCI. When you plugged in that second laptop, it distributed that video to both screens, even though laptop 1 was already connected. Do we want that behavior? We might not. We might want to validate whether or not, hey, if laptop 1 is still there, then maybe they're going to share the two screens, and laptop 1's on the left side and laptop 2's on the right side. So we don't always want to take it over every way, which means we have to validate more things. Now we need to look at, hey, is laptop 1 there? If it is, we're going to do something else. When you go down that path, you certainly can do it with control components. You can make that happen. But as you start building those out, if you're realizing that you're building more and more of these control components that are sort of like Frankensteining their way into becoming this giant Rube Goldberg machine, it's at the point where it's defeating the purpose of the control components, because now it's almost harder to read by the next engineer because they're just looking at all these different ands and ors and knots that are wired in strange ways. You're at the point where you're scraping the ceiling of the possibility of what you can accomplish with control components. And it might be time for you to graduate upwards to use the block controller. Because in the block controller, it makes it so easy. It's so easy to have these if statements that will validate certain conditions. And then that if statements become an if-else statement. So it's not just if one thing, but then it says if that condition is not met, then we're going to look at these other conditions and validate those. And if those aren't met, we're going to look at another set of conditions and validate those. And it's all done in this very nice, succinct, easy to read manner. So if you find that you are just using too many control components, then the intermediate class is probably the best place for you to go to. You can get far more complicated decision trees in a much smaller and scalable manner with the block controller.
All right, that's it for this exercise. We now have control over the displays for the end user. We also have given them the information they need to wirelessly present. So all of that is taken care of. Now we want to move into controlling more of the room, a lot of the room controls that we haven't really established yet. So we'll do that in the next video. I will see you there.